Picture this. Three popular seniors corner a shy junior in the girls' bathroom, lock the door from the inside, and decide to teach her a lesson she'll never forget. What they didn't know was that this quiet bookworm had spent the last 4 years training in underground boxing gyms, learning to channel her rage into devastating precision. What happened next left the bullies unconscious on the bathroom floor and became the most legendary moment in Westfield Academy's history. If you're ready for the most satisfying revenge story you'll ever hear, you're in the right place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Westfield Academy as Riley Chun walked through the ornate front entrance, her worn backpack containing everything she owned that mattered. At 16, Riley had mastered the art of being forgettable. She kept her black hair in a messy bun, wore thrift store clothes that hung loose on her small frame, and had perfected the skill of moving through crowded hallways like a ghost. Westfield Academy was the kind of elite private school where your family's net worth determined your social status, and Riley's scholarship status made her a target from day one. The students here drove luxury cars, their parents bought them for their 16th birthdays, wore designer uniforms, and planned spring breaks in European capitals. Riley took 3 buses to get to school each morning and worked nights at a 24-hour diner to help her mother pay rent on their 1-bedroom apartment. What her classmates didn't know was that Riley Chun had been fighting for survival long before she ever set foot in Westfield's marble hallways. Her father had abandoned them when she was 12, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and a restraining order her mother had been forced to file. The neighborhood they'd moved to after losing their house was the kind of place where weakness got you hurt, and Riley had learned quickly that sometimes the only way to protect yourself was to hit first and hit hard. The local boxing gym had become Riley's sanctuary. Coach Martinez, a former professional fighter whose career had ended with a devastating injury, saw something in the angry 12-year-old who showed up at his gym with split lips and bruised ribs. He taught her that rage could be focused, that pain could be transformed into power, and that the most dangerous fighters were the ones who looked like they couldn't hurt a fly. Riley had spent 4 years learning to channel her anger into precise combinations, footwork that could make opponents miss by inches, and defensive techniques that turned her opponent's strength against them. She fought in underground matches, on weekends, earning enough money to help her mother while developing skills that would make a professional fighter proud. But at Westfield Academy, she was just another scholarship kid trying to survive until graduation. The social hierarchy at Westfield was as rigid as any medieval court, and the undisputed queens of the school were Brittany Walsh, Madison Cross, and Savannah Pierce. Brittany's father owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Madison's mother was a federal judge, and Savannah's family controlled the largest law firm in 3 states. Together, they ruled Westfield Academy through a combination of social manipulation, family influence, and casual cruelty that left their victims isolated and broken. Riley had managed to avoid their attention for 2 years by being completely unremarkable. She sat in the back of classes, ate lunch alone in the library, and never spoke unless directly questioned by a teacher. Her strategy had worked perfectly until the morning she made the mistake of witnessing something she wasn't supposed to see. It happened during 3rd period when Riley was using the bathroom pass to escape a particularly brutal chemistry class. She'd rounded the corner near the senior lockers when she saw Brittany and her crew surrounding a freshman girl named Sophie Kim. Sophie was crying while Brittany rifled through her backpack, pulling out what looked like medication bottles and dumping the contents into the trash. Riley recognized the scene immediately. Sophie was diabetic, and Brittany was destroying her insulin supplies for the twisted pleasure of watching someone suffer. Riley had seen this kind of casual cruelty before, But something about Sophie's terrified face triggered every protective instinct Riley had developed over years of fighting for survival. Riley pulled out her phone and started recording, documenting Brittany's actions and the way Madison and Savannah held Sophie's arms to prevent her from protecting her medical supplies. The video clearly showed Brittany's face as she laughed while destroying medication that could literally save someone's life. Riley had captured everything, including audio of Brittany's cruel taunts about Sophie's medical condition. What Riley didn't realize was that Madison had spotted her reflection in the trophy case behind them. The three seniors exchanged glances that communicated volumes about what needed to happen next. They'd built their reputations on the fear that kept potential witnesses silent, and Riley Chun had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Riley thought she'd escaped unnoticed, returning to chemistry class with her explosive evidence safely stored on her phone. She planned to report the incident to the administration during lunch, confident that video proof would finally hold Brittany accountable for her behavior. Riley had no way of knowing that her quiet rebellion had just painted a target on her back, or that the three most dangerous students at Westfield Academy were already planning their retaliation. The rest of the morning passed normally, with Riley attending classes and taking notes while secretly planning how to expose Brittany's cruelty. She felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since arriving at Westfield, finally seeing a chance to use her evidence to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Riley had spent years being invisible, but Sophie Kim's terrified face had awakened something in her that refused to stay hidden any longer. As the lunch bell rang and students began flooding the hallways, Riley gathered her things and headed toward the administration office. She had no idea that Brittany, Madison, and Savannah were already waiting for her, having planned every detail of what would happen when they cornered the scholarship girl, who thought she could threaten their carefully constructed world of privilege and impunity. Riley had no idea she was walking into a trap as she made her way through Westfield Academy's pristine corridors toward the administration building. The lunch period buzz filled the hallways as students gathered in their usual social clusters, but Riley remained focused on her mission to report what she'd witnessed. She clutched her phone tightly, knowing the video evidence would finally expose Brittany Walsh for the monster she really was. What Riley didn't understand was the intricate web of power and protection that surrounded Westfield's elite families. Brittany Walsh wasn't just another rich kid with a mean streak. Her father, Robert Walsh, served on the school's board of directors and had donated enough money over the years to have the new gymnasium named after their family. When Brittany got into trouble, which happened more often than most people realized, a simple phone call from her father could make problems disappear faster than morning fog. Madison Cross enjoyed even more protection through her mother's position as a federal judge. Judge Patricia Cross had connections throughout the local legal system, and she'd made it clear to Westfield's administration that her daughter's academic record needed to remain pristine for her Ivy League applications. Any disciplinary actions that might jeopardize Madison's future were quietly buried in administrative paperwork that never saw the light of day.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Savannah Pierce represented the most dangerous kind of protection because her family's law firm handled legal matters for half the wealthy families in the district, including several Westfield Academy board members. When Savannah faced consequences for her actions, her father's legal team would arrive with carefully worded letters about potential defamation lawsuits and damage to his daughter's reputation. School administrators had learned it was easier to look the other way than to face the Pierce family's legal machinery. Together, the three girls had created a reign of terror that stretched back to their freshman year. They'd perfected the art of psychological warfare, targeting students who couldn't fight back and leaving victims too traumatized or intimidated to report their experiences. Previous attempts to expose their behavior had been met with swift retaliation that destroyed academic records, social reputations, and family relationships. Sarah Chun, a sophomore from the previous year, had tried to report Madison for stealing her scholarship application essays and submitting them as her own work. Within a week, Sarah found herself accused of plagiarism, her scholarship revoked, and her family facing legal threats that forced them to withdraw her from Westfield entirely. The message was clear, crossing the trinity of Brittany Madison. And Savannah came with devastating consequences that extended far beyond the school walls. Riley had heard whispers about their victims, but she'd never paid attention to the stories because they seemed too extreme to be true. Jessica Martinez had supposedly attempted suicide after Brittany orchestrated a social media campaign that destroyed her reputation with fabricated evidence of cheating. Kevin Thompson had transferred schools mid-semester after Madison convinced the administration he was dealing drugs, planting evidence in his locker during a surprise search. Ashley Rivera had simply disappeared one day, her family moving across the country after Savannah's father threatened legal action that would have bankrupted them. The three girls had developed a sophisticated system for identifying and neutralizing threats to their dominance. They monitored social media for any negative mentions, recruited younger students as informants through a combination of bribes and threats, and maintained detailed files on potential enemies that included family financial information, academic vulnerabilities, and personal secrets that could be weaponized when necessary. Their latest victim selection process had become almost scientific in its precision. They targeted students who were isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to have powerful advocates. Scholarship students were particularly attractive targets because their families typically lacked the resources to fight back legally, and their precarious financial situations made them hesitant to risk losing their educational opportunities. Rayleigh represented everything they despised about Westfield's forced diversity initiatives. She was poor, academically successful despite her background, and had the audacity to believe she belonged in their world. Worse, she demonstrated the kind of quiet dignity that made their own behavior look even more grotesque by comparison. Her very presence in their elite environment felt like a personal insult to everything they believed about natural social hierarchies. The bathroom plan had been Madison's idea, inspired by a psychological thriller she'd watched the previous weekend. The girls' bathroom on the third floor was perfect for their purposes because it was isolated from the main hallway, traffic, and had a door that locked from the inside. Students rarely used it during lunch period, preferring the more social bathrooms near the cafeteria. Most importantly, it was located in a section of the building where security cameras had been scheduled for installation, but hadn't been completed yet. Brittany had suggested they wait until after lunch to execute their plan, but Madison argued that striking immediately would catch Riley off guard and prevent her from sharing the video with anyone else. Savannah had volunteered to handle the technical aspects, using her knowledge of the school's communication systems to ensure they wouldn't be interrupted during their confrontation with the scholarship girl who'd forgotten her place. Riley finally reached the administration building, but found herself facing an unexpected obstacle. Mrs. Henderson, the principal's secretary, informed her that Principal Davidson was attending an emergency board meeting and wouldn't be available until the following morning. The assistant principal was handling discipline issues at the middle school campus, and the guidance counselors were all attending a mandatory training session downtown. The timing felt suspicious to Riley, but she didn't yet understand how thoroughly. The Walsh, Cross, and Pierce families had infiltrated every level of Westfield's administrative structure. Brittany's mother served as president of the Parent-Teacher Association. Madison's father was the chairman of the school's disciplinary review board, and Savannah's uncle was the district superintendent. When they wanted school officials to be unavailable, arrangements could be made with a few strategic phone calls. Riley reluctantly decided to wait until the following day to report the incident, figuring that 24 hours wouldn't make much difference in the long run. She had no way of knowing that Brittany, Madison, and Savannah were already implementing their plan to ensure that her evidence would never see the light of day. They'd spent their lunch period carefully choreographing every detail of Riley's upcoming humiliation, confident that their victim would be too broken to cause them any future problems. As Riley headed toward her fifth period class, she noticed the hallways seemed unusually empty for the middle of lunch period. Most students were either in the cafeteria or gathered in the common areas, leaving the academic buildings largely deserted. She felt a subtle unease creeping up her spine, the same instinct that had kept her alive in her old neighborhood when danger was approaching. The three girls positioned themselves strategically throughout the building, with Savannah monitoring the main hallway, Madison watching the stairwells, and Brittany waiting near the third-floor bathroom where their trap would be sprung. They'd done this before with other victims, perfecting their timing and coordination until they could isolate targets without leaving any witnesses or evidence of their involvement. Riley climbed the stairs toward her advanced placement literature class, unaware that her every movement was being tracked by predators who turned psychological warfare into an art form. She was still thinking about Sophie Kim's terrified face and planning how to present her evidence most effectively when she reached the third floor and unknowingly stepped into the most dangerous situation of her young life. Riley's footsteps echoed softly in the empty third-floor corridor as she approached her advanced placement literature classroom. The silence felt unusual for the middle of lunch period, but she attributed it to the rainy weather keeping students indoors in the main common areas. She was mentally rehearsing how she'd present her evidence against Brittany Walsh to Principal Davidson the following morning when she heard the distinctive sound of expensive heels clicking against marble behind her. Turning around, Riley found herself face to face with Brittany Walsh, whose perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the cold calculation in her blue eyes. Madison Cross and Savannah Pierce flanked her on either side, forming a human wall that blocked Riley's path back toward the stairwell. Their coordinated designer uniforms and identical predatory smiles made them look like some twisted version of a fashion magazine spread. "Well, well, well," Brittany said, her voice carrying the practiced condescension that had terrorized Westfield students for years. "If it isn't our little scholarship spy, I hear you've been playing amateur photographer today." The way she emphasized the word scholarship made it sound like an infectious disease, and Riley felt her stomach drop as she realized they knew about the video. Madison stepped closer, her mother's judicial authority seeming to radiate from her petite frame. "You know, Riley, privacy is really important at Westfield Academy. Some people might consider secret recording to be a serious violation of trust." Her tone was conversational, almost friendly, but Riley could hear the threat underlying every carefully chosen word. Savannah, who had been silently studying Riley like a lawyer examining evidence, finally spoke with the kind of legal precision that ran in her family. "The thing is, Riley, when students make false accusations against their classmates, it can create all sorts of problems. Legal problems, academic problems, the kind of problems that follow you for the rest of your life." Riley's hand instinctively moved toward her phone, but Brittany noticed the gesture and smiled with genuine amusement. "Oh, you're worried about your little video. Don't be. We're going to take care of that problem right now." She gestured toward the girls' bathroom behind Riley, its door standing open like a mouth waiting to swallow its prey. "I don't know what you're talking about," Riley said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. She recognized the predatory energy surrounding her, the same dangerous tension she'd learned to identify in her old neighborhood when violence was about to erupt. These girls might wear designer clothes and speak with upper-class accents, but Riley could see the cruelty beneath their polished exteriors. "Sure you don't," Madison laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the empty hallway. "But just in case your memory needs some help, We thought we'd have a private conversation about appropriate behavior at our school. The emphasis on our school left no doubt about how these three viewed Riley's presence at Westfield Academy. Brittany moved with surprising speed, grabbing Riley's arm and pulling her toward the bathroom door. Riley's fighting instincts screamed at her to resist, but she was caught off guard by the sudden physical contact and stumbled forward. Madison and Savannah immediately flanked her, their grip firm, but not yet painful, maintaining the pretense that this was just a friendly conversation between classmates. "Let go of me," Riley said, her voice carrying a note of warning that the three girls were too arrogant to recognize. She'd spent years learning to control her temper, channeling her rage into precise combinations and defensive techniques, but she could feel that control beginning to slip as they forced her into the bathroom. The bathroom was larger than Riley expected, with gleaming white tiles and expensive fixtures that reflected Westfield's commitment to luxury in every detail. More importantly, she noticed that the door had a heavy deadbolt lock that could be engaged from the inside, creating a soundproof chamber where anything could happen without interference from the outside world. Savannah immediately moved to the door and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click that echoed off the tiled walls like a gunshot. The sound seemed to transform the three girls, their masks of civilized behavior falling away to reveal the predators underneath. Riley found herself trapped in a confined space with three people who had spent years perfecting the art of psychological torture. "Now then," Brittany said, pulling out her own phone and holding it like a weapon. "Let's talk about that video you took. You're going to delete it, apologize for violating our privacy, and promise never to interfere in our business again. If you do those three simple things, we might consider letting you finish the school year without any major problems." Riley's back was against the far wall, her escape routes blocked by three opponents who thought they held all the advantages. What they didn't understand was that Riley had been in worse situations than this, facing enemies who wanted to do more than just humiliate her. The confined space that was supposed to work against her actually played to her strengths, limiting their ability to surround her while giving her solid surfaces to use for leverage. "And if I refuse?" Riley asked, her voice calm despite the dangerous energy building in her chest. She was calculating distances and angles, identifying potential targets and escape routes, her mind automatically shifting into the tactical mode that Coach Martinez had drilled into her during countless hours of training. Madison laughed as if Riley had told an amusing joke. "Oh, sweetie, you don't really have a choice. You see, we've done this before. Students who cross us tend to have very unfortunate accidents. Academic accidents, social accidents, sometimes even physical accidents. The kind of accidents that follow you wherever you go." Brittany stepped closer, invading Riley's personal space with the confidence of someone who had never faced real resistance. "For instance, we might discover that you've been cheating on exams, or dealing drugs, or stealing from other students. Amazing how evidence has a way of appearing when you know the right people." Riley felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar coldness that she'd learned to embrace during her darkest training sessions. These three had built their power on the fear and helplessness of their victims, but they'd made a critical error in targeting someone who had learned to turn fear into fuel for violence. She could see in their eyes that they expected her to break down, to beg for mercy, to submit to their will like all their previous victims. "You want my phone?" Riley said quietly, reaching into her pocket with deliberate slowness. Brittany's eyes lit up with triumph, thinking she'd won another easy victory through intimidation and threats. Madison and Savannah moved closer, ready to witness their latest victim's humiliation and surrender. Riley pulled out her phone and held it in her right hand, extending it toward Brittany as if she was about to hand it over. The three girls relaxed slightly, confident that their reputation for destroying anyone who opposed them had once again intimidated a potential threat into submission. They had no way of knowing that Riley Chun had spent 4 years learning to use every apparent weakness as a weapon. "Come and take it," Riley said, her voice carrying a tone that should have warned them about the violence that was about to erupt in their pristine bathroom prison. Brittany Walsh reached for Riley's phone with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been denied anything in her privileged life. Her manicured fingers were inches from the device when Riley's left hand shot forward with lightning speed, grabbing Brittany's wrist and twisting it in a direction that human joints weren't designed to bend. The sharp crack of tendons stretching beyond their limits echoed off the bathroom tiles, followed immediately by Brittany's scream of shock and pain. Riley used Brittany's momentum against her, pulling the taller girl forward while simultaneously driving her right elbow upward into Brittany's solar plexus. The impact drove all the air from Brittany's lungs in a whooshing gasp, and she doubled over, clutching her stomach while trying desperately to breathe. Riley's phone clattered to the floor, forgotten in the sudden explosion of violence that had transformed their intimidation session into something far more dangerous. Madison Cross recovered from her shock first, lunging toward Riley with her hands outstretched like claws. Madison had apparently watched too many movies about girl fights, expecting hair-pulling and scratching rather than the systematic destruction of opponents that Riley had been trained to deliver. Riley sidestepped Madison's wild charge with minimal effort, using the other girl's momentum to guide her face first into the bathroom wall with a sickening thud. The expensive mirror above the sink spiderwebbed from the impact, and Madison slumped to the floor with blood streaming from her nose. Her designer uniform was already stained crimson, and her eyes held the glazed look of someone who had just discovered that violence was nothing like the sanitized version she'd seen in entertainment. The federal judge's daughter had never experienced real physical pain before, and the shock of it left her completely paralyzed. Savannah Pierce had been frozen in disbelief as she watched her two best friends neutralized in a matter of seconds. But legal training ran in her family, and she quickly began calculating her options. Instead of attacking Riley directly, she reached for her phone to call for help, thinking that documenting the incident would give her leverage in whatever legal proceedings followed this bathroom brawl. Riley spotted Savannah's movement in her peripheral vision and reacted with the instinctive speed of someone who had learned that hesitation could mean the difference between victory and defeat. She spun toward Savannah with perfect balance, her right leg sweeping in a wide arc that caught the phone and sent it flying across the bathroom to shatter against the far wall. The follow-through of her kick positioned her perfectly for the uppercut that connected with Savannah's jaw, lifting the girl off her feet for a moment before she collapsed in an unconscious heap beside the broken remains of her phone. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds, but the bathroom now looked like a crime scene. Brittany was still gasping for air while clutching her twisted wrist. Madison was bleeding profusely from her broken nose, and Savannah lay motionless on the expensive tile floor. Riley stood in the center of the destruction, her breathing barely elevated despite having just dismantled 3 opponents who outweighed her by a combined total of nearly 100 pounds. Riley's hands weren't even shaking as she retrieved her phone from the floor, checking to make sure the device hadn't been damaged in the brief scuffle. The video of Brittany destroying Sophie's insulin was still safely stored in her phone's memory, and she quickly uploaded it to 3 different cloud storage services to ensure it couldn't be lost or destroyed. The evidence that had started this confrontation was now permanently preserved, regardless of what happened next. Brittany tried to speak, but her diaphragm was still spasming from the elbow strike, and she could only produce strangled whispers. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared with tears and sweat, and her designer uniform was wrinkled from her struggle to breathe. The girl who had terrorized Westfield Academy for years was learning what it felt like to be completely helpless in the face of superior force. Madison was making soft whimpering sounds as blood continued to flow from her nose, creating a growing puddle on the white tiles beneath her face. She'd managed to prop herself against the wall, but her eyes couldn't seem to focus properly, and she kept touching her face as if she couldn't believe what had happened to her. The daughter of a federal judge was discovering that legal immunity didn't extend to physical confrontations with trained fighters. Savannah remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Riley knelt beside her to check for serious injury, her medical knowledge gained from years of treating her own fight injuries telling her that Savannah would recover fully but would likely have a concussion that would keep her out of school for several days. The girl who had threatened Riley with legal consequences was now facing the very real possibility of explaining her condition to parents who wouldn't appreciate learning about their daughter's bullying activities. Riley stood up and walked to the bathroom door, turning the deadbolt to unlock their prison. The hallway beyond was still empty, the lunch period isolation that the three girls had planned to use against Riley now working in her favor. She had several minutes before the period ended and students began moving through the corridors, giving her time to consider her options and plan her next moves. The smart play would be to leave immediately, claim self-defense if anyone asked questions, and hope that the three girls would be too embarrassed to report what had really happened. Riley knew that Brittany, Madison, and Savannah had built their reputations on being untouchable, and admitting that they'd been defeated by a scholarship student would damage their social standing more than any official punishment could. But Riley also understood that leaving these three conscious and mobile would give them time to coordinate their stories and possibly retaliate against her when she least expected it. They had the resources and connections to make her life miserable in ways that went far beyond anything that had happened in this bathroom. More importantly, they would continue targeting other vulnerable students like Sophie Kim, using their wealth and family connections to avoid consequences for their cruelty. Riley pulled out her phone again and activated the video recording function, documenting the scene she'd created. Brittany was still struggling to breathe properly. Madison was bleeding and possibly concussed, and Savannah remained unconscious on the floor. The evidence clearly showed the aftermath of a physical confrontation, but it also demonstrated that Riley had used only the minimum force necessary to defend herself against three attackers. "For the record," Riley said clearly, speaking to her phone's camera while keeping the three girls in frame, "Brittany Walsh, Madison Cross, and Savannah Pierce locked me in this bathroom and threatened me with academic sabotage and physical violence. They demanded that I delete evidence of Brittany destroying another student's medical supplies. I defended myself when they became physically aggressive." Riley ended the recording and immediately uploaded it to the same cloud services where she'd stored the original video of Brittany's assault on Sophie Kim. Now she had comprehensive documentation of both incidents, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that would be impossible for even the most connected families to suppress or destroy. Brittany had finally recovered enough breath to speak, though her voice was hoarse and weak. "You have no idea what you've done," she wheezed, still cradling her injured wrist. "My father will destroy you for this. Your family will lose everything." Riley looked down at the girl who had ruled Westfield Academy through fear and intimidation, seeing nothing but a broken bully whose power had evaporated the moment she faced real resistance. "Your father can try," Riley replied calmly. "But I have video evidence of everything that happened here today. The question is whether you want this to stay between us or become a very public discussion about your behavior." The bathroom door stood open behind Riley, offering her a path back to the normal world of classes and homework and teenage concerns. But she knew that walking through that door would mark the end of her invisible existence at Westfield Academy and the beginning of something much more complicated and dangerous. Riley walked out of that bathroom knowing her life at Westfield Academy would never be the same, but she had no idea how quickly word would spread about what had happened on the third floor. By the time the final bell rang that afternoon, cell phone videos of the aftermath were already circulating through social media. Students had discovered Brittany, Madison, and Savannah in various states of injury and consciousness, and the story had taken on a life of its own. The official version from the administration was that 3 students had suffered injuries in an unfortunate accident, but everyone at Westfield knew the truth. Riley Chun, the quiet scholarship girl who had spent 2 years invisible in their hallways, had single-handedly dismantled the most feared trio in school history. The videos Riley had taken provided undeniable evidence of both Brittany's destruction of Sophie's insulin and the subsequent confrontation that had led to their humiliation. Sophie Kim became the first person to publicly thank Riley for standing up when no one else would. Her testimony about Brittany's systematic targeting of her medical condition sparked an investigation that revealed years of similar incidents that had been covered up by administrative officials who were too intimidated by wealthy families to take action. Other students began coming forward with their own stories, creating an avalanche of accusations that even the most connected parents couldn't suppress. The Pierce family's law firm immediately went into damage control mode, but they faced an unprecedented situation. Savannah's concussion required medical treatment that created official documentation of her injuries, and hospital records were much harder to manipulate than school disciplinary files. The video evidence Riley had preserved made it impossible to claim that their daughter had been the victim of an unprovoked attack, especially when multiple witnesses confirmed the 3 girls had been seen forcing Riley into the bathroom. Judge Patricia Cross discovered that her judicial position actually worked against her family when the incident became public. The legal community began questioning whether she had used her influence to protect her daughter from previous consequences, and an ethics investigation was launched into her conduct. Madison's broken nose required surgery that kept her out of school for 2 weeks, during which time her Ivy League applications were quietly withdrawn by college admissions offices that wanted no association with the scandal. Robert Walsh's position on Westfield's board of directors became a liability when parents demanded answers about how such systematic bullying had been allowed to continue for years. The gymnasium that bore his family's name became a source of embarrassment rather than pride, and several major donors threatened to withdraw their support unless significant changes were made to the school's disciplinary policies. Brittany's injured wrist required physical therapy that served as a daily reminder of her defeat at the hands of someone she had considered beneath her notice. Principal Davidson, faced with irrefutable evidence and mounting public pressure, had no choice but to implement the kind of comprehensive reforms that should have been in place years earlier. The 3 girls were expelled from Westfield Academy, their transcripts marked with disciplinary actions that would follow them to any institution they attempted to attend. More importantly, the school established anonymous reporting systems and hired counselors specifically trained to handle harassment cases without regard for family political connections. Riley found herself in the unexpected position of being both celebrated and feared by her classmates. Students who had been terrorized by Brittany's crew began approaching her with gratitude and requests for protection, while others maintained their distance out of concern about what the quiet girl might be capable of. The boxing skills that she had kept hidden for 2 years became common knowledge, transforming her from invisible scholarship student into the most talked-about person at Westfield. Coach Martinez was proud but concerned when Riley told him about the bathroom confrontation. He had taught her to use her fighting skills only when absolutely necessary, and he worried that her newfound reputation might create situations where violence became expected rather than exceptional. They increased her training intensity to help her channel the stress and attention that came with her transformed social status. But Riley remained committed to using her abilities only in defense of herself and others who couldn't protect themselves. The incident had consequences that extended far beyond Westfield Academy's walls. Riley's story became a symbol of resistance against institutional privilege and systemic bullying, inspiring similar confrontations at other elite schools where Wealthy families had protected predatory children from consequences. Educational consultants began studying the Westfield case as an example of how individual courage could expose and transform corrupt systems that prioritized reputation over student safety. Rayleigh's mother was initially terrified when she learned about the confrontation, worried that their family would face retaliation from powerful enemies they couldn't afford to fight. But the overwhelming public support for Riley's actions, combined with the legal protections afforded by clear self-defense, made it impossible for the three families to pursue revenge without further damaging their already tarnished reputations. The scholarship girl who had seemed so vulnerable was protected by the very publicity that the wealthy families desperately wanted to avoid. The college application process that Riley had worried might be derailed by the incident actually became easier when admissions officers learned about her courage in standing up to systematic bullying. Essays about the bathroom confrontation and its aftermath helped her secure full scholarships to several prestigious universities, with admissions committees praising her integrity and moral leadership. The girl who had fought for survival in underground boxing matches was now being recruited by institutions that valued both her academic achievements and her character. Sophie Kim recovered fully from her medical emergency and became one of Riley's closest friends, bonding over their shared experience of targeting by Westfield's elite. Together, they established a support network for other scholarship students and worked with the new administration to ensure that economic status could never again be used as a basis for harassment or discrimination. Their friendship became a symbol of how courage and compassion could transform even the most toxic environments. 5 years later, Riley returned to Westfield Academy as a guest speaker for their new anti-bullying program, addressing an auditorium full of students who had heard the legends about the quiet girl who had changed everything. She spoke about the importance of standing up for others who couldn't protect themselves, the responsibility that came with strength and privilege, and the way individual actions could create ripples that extended far beyond their original context. The three girls who had once terrorized the school were notably absent from her success story. Brittany had enrolled in a second-tier college after her expulsion, struggling to rebuild a reputation that had been permanently damaged by her association with systematic cruelty. Madison had eventually completed her education at a community college, her judicial family connections providing no protection from the consequences of her actions. Savannah had left the state entirely, seeking anonymity in a place where her family's legal reputation couldn't follow her. Riley Chun had proven that sometimes the quietest people possess the loudest voices when justice demands to be heard, and that courage could flourish in the most unexpected places when good people decided that enough was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.